Her cronies reported her missing several hours later and immediately accused us. They did this since she was the most outspoken against our armed security details. Surely we must have had something to do with it. They formed a search party, which we implored them to not go, but their minds were made up. We offered to send security with them. They declined, saying that we were probably the ones who did it. We tried to hide rolling our eyes at them and face-palming to at least show a little respect. They had believed what they believed, even to the death. Normalcy bias had overridden reality for them, and the only thing we could do is let them go. We noticed in the darkness that two of their group stayed behind, slowly coming to the realization that we may be right. The two sulked in the shadows and stood behind us, hoping to not be noticed by their likely now prior comrades. Both nodded to each other and quietly to us, that the smaller party laughed as if to beg us to not sentence them to doom by calling them out. We respected their reluctance and kept our silence in the best poker faces we could in the dark. Once the small group was safely away, the two behind us slinked back to their house. We reserved judgment should they decide to be more moderate later. With a silent nod to ourselves, we remembered to not tell them we told them so when their comrades failed to return. They went off alone, and only one made it back. He didn't want to talk about what happened, and we suspected that he left his friends to die in order to save himself. He went to his house, and we haven't seen him since. We heard he ended up resenting the two that stayed, as if they could have somehow helped, and that was that. The security group had collectively decided that we wanted to send patrols outside the perimeter, but we just flat out didn't have the people. The patrols possibly could have made the surrounding area a tiny bit safer, but it would have been at the expense of the subdivision's safety. Our entire security team had only the maximum members to do one or the other, not both, so we all had agreed to stay. The decision unfortunately hadn't helped anyone over the normalcy bias. Well respectfully planted some rose starts outside each of their houses, but couldn't think of much else to do. On their porches and doors, we used the dried up flowers, or the kids made cutout ones, and we promised we would plant her more flowers in the spring, but inwardly wondered if we would last that long. There hadn't been any animals in any of the now empty houses except for goldfish, which needed food and their tanks swapped out with clean water more often now that their oxygen pumps stopped working. The prior owners had been out of fish food, but someone who used to have fish decided to visit the houses daily with a little bit of fresh water from the creek and fish chow. In the spring, they could be moved outside, and we'd heard someone started digging an enormous fish pond in a piece of the yard that nothing else would grow in. Everyone else has stayed inside the perimeter since we lost those folks. We had gardens and chickens and everything, but it was really too cold for the gardens to produce yet. The homes with chickens and roosters stopped eating the eggs for a bit so we could get enough little chickies for everyone to get started as they put up more and more chicken fencing. The winters had been getting progressively nastier, and we'd had to deal with snowfall several times in the last 6 weeks. We joked about it and called global warming. That irritated some people, but we had got so tired of it being rammed down our throats in the prior to the collapse that it never got old. So I was getting ready to go to work, aka security detail. I got done putting on my warmest clothes that I had. I had a chest rig that a friend gave me. It didn't carry armored plates, but had pouches for 6 AR mags and 5 pistol mags. Unable to shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen, I'd sold the last of my belongings worth anything prior to the collapse. AR prices were down, and was able to get myself a very good mid-range AR and completely deck it out with everything I wanted. It was very affordable at the time I bought it, and even though there were great budget ARs, this mid-range one was really good. It had a collapsible stock and stubby foregrip that fit my hand just right. My AR also had a budget red dot sight that was actually surprisingly good. I could flick the color from red to green depending on the background. I usually chose red, but it was nice to have choices depending on the contrast. It also had a sling that was mounted on the side instead of below. This allowed me to have my rifle naturally hang instead of always wanting to be upside down. I reminded myself I needed to go find some Velcro so I could truly get it to hang off one side like I was supposed to. It had turned out I'd only bought one side of the Velcro, and it was sticky to boot, which didn't help it swivel like it was supposed to. The package lay half open until I could find the right type, maybe trade or something, since this type was useful to hang light objects on surfaces as needed. I had my single stack 9mm sidearm, the 5 spare mags for it sat in my chest rig somewhat loosely. I could strap them down enough, though, to where they weren't at risk from flying out. I did need to upgrade to a double-stacked 9mm somehow because of the capacity. My single stack had to make do for now. Between all of my mags for my 9mm, I had 40 rounds. About half were hollow points and half were ball, since I never knew I'd be up against, and self-defense ammo had been triple the price of the ball. That was 2 9-round mags and 3 7-round mags, and 1 in the chamber. There were double-stacked 9mm on the market that could carry as much in 2 mags. The guy on my team said they would keep an eye out for me, but they were proud I was as prepared as I was. Behind my pistol mags on my rig was my AR mags. My AR mags held 30 rounds apiece, which was normal capacity for the 5.56x45 ammunition. I usually put in 29 though, so they didn't jam. I could comfortably hold 6 mags, which gave me 180 rounds on my chest, another 30 on the 7th mag in my AR. That sounded like a lot of ammo, but in a firefight you could easily burn through that much in a minute or so. The idea is to either hold out for backup or use that ammo to get to the main ammunition storage to keep fighting. In a fighting load, there were people that carried as many as 8 or 10 magazines if they were going for 5.56x45. That bought you a little more flexibility, but you didn't want to carry that much all the time. It helped to know what situation you were actually going to be running into, so 6 mags was generally a safe number as long as you had help and resupply nearby. I finished suiting up and put on my winter hat, checked my cat's water and food, and kissed her on the head. She liked that and headbutted me in the chin and then squawked at me. I tousled her hair a little bit and then remembered I needed to grab my radio. It was sitting in its little cradle staying charged. My radio used almost no power and took up almost no power at all to charge. I'd had this battery backup system for when we used to get really bad storms. The plug port going into the system had become loose, so it was difficult to charge. A mechanic tinkerer friend in the group had fixed it for me. I could charge this unit up off any 125 volt 15 amp wall style outlet, which a lot of vehicles came with these days. So one day another group was letting their mobile command center idle that had passed through, and they let me charge my storm survival system up in there. Up until that point I had just been charging it little by little in people's vehicles that had the outlet built in. That was enough to keep it going and thus keep my radio going. I need to find my own inverter and charge controller someday. In the meantime, this solution was great to get the unit back up to full charge, though. That would keep my radio charged for years. The unit had wall-style outlet port on it too, which was one of the reasons why it was so useful. The radio's cradle also had a light on it, as did the power adapter, so I always knew when it was charging and charged. It also blinked furiously if for some reason I put the radio in the cradle wrong, so it was a pretty fail-safe system. I had the radio equipment and storm machine set up on my tote full of survival magazines. If I ever had to bug out, this is all that I'd need to come with me as long as there was room.